We are conducting this monthly meeting today by video teleconference and also in person. Right now, the first thing on the agenda is call to order. We have the recognition of a quorum. I will conduct a roll call of board members that are present on this teleconference. When I call your name, please say yes. Steve Sullivan.
Yes.
Dr. Colbert.
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. May.
Yes.
Thank you. Candace White.
Yes.
Thank you. Heather Allen. Heather Allen. Keith Joy.
Yes.
Thank you. Mrs. Hampton, do we have any introductions this morning?
Yes. Good morning, Chairman Hilton and board members. I'm very pleased to let you know that David Becker has joined the district as an Engineer 1 in our industrial compliance section. Mr. Becker is currently in the field on an inspection.
Okay, thank you. Any public recognitions this morning, Ms. Hamilton?
Yes, sir. The district would like to recognize Heather Allen for her service to the board, the community, and the district. Ms. Allen has recently found her dream home in Nelson County, so she will be leaving the board with that move. For those of you who may remember, Ms. Allen was appointed to the board last June, and she has shown great interest in improving Louisville's air quality and dedication to the district's mission over this past year, and we deeply appreciate that. I've met Heather once. I dropped off some board orientation materials to her, and that is the only time that I've seen her. So in the past year, it's been very challenging. She stepped up to that challenge. So please join me as we wish Ms. Allen good health and joy in her new home and thank her for her service.
Also, on behalf of the board, I would like to offer my sincere appreciation, gratitude, and thanks for serving on the APCD board. Wishing you the best. And I think you mentioned that she's been on the board a little over a year.
Just a little over a year.
Well, wishing her the best. Thank you very much. Any other public recognitions, Ms. Hamilton?
No, sir.
Okay. Moving along, approval of minutes. Most of you have received the meeting minutes of the June 16 minutes of the meeting. Are there any questions or comments or upgrades to the meeting minutes of June 16?
Not for me.
Hearing none?
I have a comment.
Yes.
Doesn't pertain to the minutes, but on my audio, there's a really bad echo. Every word said is echoed multiple times. I wonder if anyone else on remote is getting this. It's really hard to understand what's being said.
I'm not getting it. I had in the past when I used the computer audio as well as using my phone at the same time. So you need to only have one device active at the time.
Okay.
But yeah, I just have the computer audio. That's all.
Well,
Just ask if anybody else is having this.
is anyone else experiencing the same problem? Board members or anyone?
No, not right now.
Dr. Coburn, I actually do see you with two connections. I can kick one of them out and see if that solves your problem for you.
Okay. Hopefully that will solve the problem. Are there any comments?
I'm sorry,
Pardon?
this is Candace. I was also, I sent a chat. Can we move the camera to the speaker? Because we can't see who's speaking.
Unfortunately, we have only one camera and all board members need to be on it at a time who are in this room. I can try and zoom in on Mr. Hilton and Mr. Sullivan for now.
Okay, that's better. That's perfect.
Yeah.
We just couldn't see the chairman.
The other
Apologies.
issue, The other issue is that the audio is not connected to the video in the room. So when they speak, it does not autofocus and bring them to the fore like you are now, Candace. Normally, it would bring whoever's speaking to the forefront
Right.
of the presentation.
Right, I
So
understand
that
that.
is
It was just the
that's
camera was only
disconnected.
on
So
one of the board members, so I wanted to make sure the chairman was in the video shot.
Well, thank you, Candace. Any other comments regarding audio or video?
Thanks for the help getting this all set up.
It's going to be a challenge. Thank you for your comments. Going back to the meeting minutes of June 16th, are there any upgrades, corrections to the minutes from board members?
No.
Hearing none, the minutes are approved. Thank you very much. Mrs. Hampton, do we have any public comment this morning?
Mr. Gary?
I have not received any registrations.
Okay, thank you. Unfinished business? Don't have any unfinished business this morning.
We still have some other items under public comment. Are there any members in the audience or on the teleconference?
Yeah, I can't find my thing. Yeah. Are there any members of the public in the Edison room that wish to make a comment? If so, please raise your hand. Seeing none. Are there any members of the public that wish to make a brief comment on the teleconference? Please raise your hand by teleconference and you will be called on. This is a feature you can find on the participants list or by pressing *3 if joining by phone, and you will be called upon.
I am not seeing any hands raised, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. This completes the public comment portion of the meeting. Unfinished business? There is no unfinished business this morning. New business? There is no new business. Committee reports? I don't think the committees have met in the last month or so. No committee reports. Staff reports. We at the director's report, Mrs. Hamilton.
Thank you very much, Chairman Hilton. So as you can see, we are meeting today via video teleconference and providing an opportunity for board members and the public to join the meeting here in the Edison room. I'd like to thank Andy Purdon, Byron Gary, and others here at the district for trying to work through, and Ms. Dutt from the county attorney's office as well, how we could have this sort of meeting where we would meet in person, but also invite guests in through a virtual platform. This is a challenge. It's new. We'll evaluate how well this went with Chairman Hilton after the meeting and make revisions as necessary. But I do want to remind folks, COVID is a very fluid situation. You know, as you can see here at the Edison Center, the room has been set up to allow for social distancing between attendees and board members. APCD staff, with the exception of those who are participating directly in the meeting, are attending today virtually. Because the situation with COVID remains fluid, please be sure to check the agenda each month for instructions on how you can attend the meeting. I'm going to be very direct here. Please get vaccinated if you haven't already done so. If you have questions about where you can get a vaccine or even about the vaccine itself, I urge you to call our colleagues at Louisville Metro Public Health and Wellness at 502-912-8598 or your healthcare provider today. Please do that today. Moving on. As you know, we've talked extensively in the past about US EPA's proposed rule, the phase down of hydrofluorocarbons, establishing the Allowance Allocation and Trading Program under the American Innovation and Manufacturing Act. This proposed rule is intended to establish hydrofluorocarbon production and consumption baselines based on historical data, establish an allowance allocation program to phase down hydrofluorocarbon production and consumption, determine an initial methodology to allocating allowances and allowing for the transfer of those allowances, and establish provisions for the international transfer of allowances and also compliance and enforcement mechanisms, record keeping and reporting requirements, and also to provide data to increase transparency and support implementation of the program. So those are US EPA's goals for that rulemaking. Overall, their intent is to reduce the production and use of highly potent greenhouse gas hydrofluorocarbons by 85% over the next 15 years, which they estimate will avoid a 0.5 degrees Celsius increase in global warming by 21. 21. That's a challenge. That is a challenge. The proposed rule also includes not 2021, but 2100.
Okay.
So years from now. Sorry about that.
Okay.
It looks right when it's written. The proposed rule also includes a requirement that byproduct hydrofluorocarbon 23 or HFC 23 emissions be controlled by 2022. And that's really the important part for folks here in Louisville. We have a source that emits HFC 23. Comments on the proposed rule were due on July 6th. So we provided our comments to US EPA, and as you may have gathered by now, regulation of these chemicals is quite complex. I'm a big Shrek fan, and if you remember in the movie, he explains to Donkey that ogres are like onions. They have layers. And I'm here to tell you that the regulation of these hydrofluorocarbons is an ogre. There's lots of layers. HFCs were initially used to replace other chemicals that impact the upper stratospheric level of ozone. Remember when we had the hole in the ozone layer? Mm-hmm. These HFCs were intended to replace other chemicals we were using, refrigerants and other sorts of applications that were depleting that ozone layer. The ozone-depleting substances are regulated exclusively by EPA under Title VI of the Clean Air Act. HFCs, while good for the ozone layer, have proved to be problematic from a greenhouse gas perspective. They are subject to a wide variety of end-use regulations that do focus on their greenhouse gas warming potential, that encourage the use of alternative chemicals with less greenhouse gas potential. This rule is different. It adds on to those already existing regulatory requirements. So with that in mind, our comments included the following. EPA should revise its significant new alternative policy, or SNAP, to require the replacement of HFCs that may have previously been substituted for ozone-depleting substances. They're currently not subject to this SNAP policy. EPA should clarify the extent that it may preempt further state or local regulation of HFCs under the preemption clause in the American Innovation Manufacturing Act, or the AIM Act, and also under Title VI of the Clean Air Act for those ozone-depleting substances. We asked EPA to further clarify the proposed rule's impact on those HFCs that may be unintentionally created, such as those here in Louisville, which are a byproduct of the production of HCFC22, versus those that may be intentionally created. And that is one of the more confusing elements of the rule. We expect that US EPA will be doing some additional data gathering to better understand the intentional versus unintentional creation of those chemicals. But it's hard to comment on a proposed rule when that question is left unanswered. EPA should adopt a reduction-based standard based on emissions rather than on production as proposed. This would provide for necessary transparency, which is a key part of environmental justice, and be consistent with Chemours' commitment to reduce their emissions by 99% by 2022. Production information can be withheld as confidential business information. Emissions information cannot. And so for that reason, we recommended that EPA, again, adopt a emissions-based standard as opposed to a production-based standard. Finally, we ask that EPA also include Chemours' commitment to reduce their emissions of HCFC 22 by 2024 in EPA's planned rulemaking for 2023 to further implement the requirements of the AIM Act in a subsequent rulemaking. So, in the meantime, a local church has sent a letter to Mayor Fisher to share concerns that Chemours, our local emitter of HFC 23, should be required to reduce those emissions more quickly than the October 2022 deadline proposed in EPA's rule. Copies of the letter and the district's comments will be sent to the board. EPA has an aggressive timeline to approve the proposed rule, so we expect them to finalize it later this summer. Like the district's own rulemaking, EPA will provide a written response to our comments, and we will share those with the board as soon as they are available. Under the AIM Act, they have allocation and allowance measures they must put into place beginning in September. So they've got a very short time frame to turn this rulemaking around. We will see those comments shortly. Ms. Allen has joined the meeting.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Did they provide a rationale for why they went to production-based versus emission-based metric? I mean, it seems.
No, I'm hoping they will.
Did they do that for any other production of hazardous material?
So
it seems strange to me. On its face.
I've been doing this since 1986, so I've been reading federal regulations a long time now. Byron is also an astute studier of those federal regulations, and I believe that in our combined experience, this is the first time that we've seen a limit that is based on that production as opposed to on the amount emitted. And again, I think it may go back to the way that they're calculating the allowances. That too is a very complex feature of this. In order to meet the AIM Act requirements, companies' emissions are taken into account into that full allocation and allotment system. How much that's taken into account, that's not very transparent. And we believe that what we've proposed is an emissions-based reduction is the more transparent way for those emissions to be tracked. Respectfully, companies may have confidential business information. Regulations should not. So we're hopeful that they will agree with us and make that change. Byron, is there more that you'd like to add?
I was just going to add that the structure of this rule is different from many of the rules we deal with because it's based on the same structure they use for the stratospheric ozone rules. The prior one, reducing the original HCFCs and CFCs, and those are produced and often not emitted immediately. They're produced and then put into refrigeration or other products and slowly emitted over time. So an emissions-based standard didn't make as much sense for those. And they use that same structure because they wanted to allow for the same trading scheme that they used for those CFCs. So that's part of the reason for that overall structure being based on production. HFC 23 is actually unique in being emitted as a byproduct right off the line, as opposed to many of the other HFCs, which are replacements for refrigerants and things like that, where they're not emitted immediately. They're put into refrigeration line where only once that meets its end of life is it all emitted.
Seems like dual criteria would be.
We think that might be.
Sense.
We think that might be possible. So again, when we have those comments from US EPA, we will share those. This is a phased rulemaking, so there will be another chance for us to share our comments and concerns probably sometime between late 2022 and 2023.
I have one quick comment. I think, if I'm not mistaken, you mentioned also, Mr. Gary, that 23, Freon 23 is a byproduct of HCF 22. And I think what they use production basis because they know how much 22. So I think they take in some type of percentage that of the 20, so much of this will be byproduct. I think.
Yeah, and yes, but our problem with that is that, you know, the certainty of air pollution control regulation is that we know how much will be emitted.
Right.
And then we know what the control efficiency is, and we can then evaluate our expectation. If it's a 90% control efficiency and they emit 100 tons, we should get a report that tells us that they controlled 90 tons at the end of the day. We don't have that certainty here. We do believe that the HFC 23 in particular is a byproduct. It does have uses. There are uses allowed under the proposed rule and under the AIM Act. It can be used, for example, to etch
Non-stick, what do you call it? They use the 22 as a, I think it's used in non-stick pots and pans, right?
22 is used in nonstick. These can be used to etch, oh gosh, Byron, help me out here.
Semiconductors.
Semiconductors,
Okay.
the chips. And they have a couple other uses that they're allowed to use that HFC 23 for. So it has some marketable value. It's just that that byproduct is more than the market needs.
Right.
It's a waste product. It should be controlled in the same way and with the same transparency as other waste products.
Now, HCFC 22, I'm not mistaken, but I think that's reported on a toxic release inventory every year.
And so you raise a really good point. Both the emissions of HFC 23 are publicly available and HCFC 22. They're just in different places.
Okay.
The HFC 23 emissions get reported through the greenhouse gas inventory. The HCFC 22 emissions go through TRI, the toxic release inventory. Okay. And part of that, Carl, is because, well, that's a long story, but if you're interested in it, I'll share it with you afterwards. The EPA does have a regulatory basis for why those are reported to those two different platforms. Okay. Those chemicals are not toxic in the way that we typically use toxic air contaminants here in Louisville. We look at TACs under our Strategic Toxic Air Reduction Program for their impact on your non-carcinogenic impact. Does it make you cough or give you a headache or make you feel sick to your stomach? And its carcinogenic impact. These chemicals don't have that effect. Their concern from a public health standpoint is that they contribute, in the case of HCFC 23, quite greatly to greenhouse gas and climate change.
Okay.
So their hazard is from an environmental standpoint as opposed to a personal health, direct health standpoint. Climate change is a health impact. So just to be clear about that, it's just not the same as the toxicity-based program we run under STAR, or that most people conceive of the reporting to the toxics release inventory. There are two different ways that a chemical may be reported under that toxics release inventory. One is that it may have an impact to human health. The other is that it may have an impact on environmental health. That's the reason for its listing there. It's the environmental health impact. So, any other questions on that?
Well, thank you for sharing the letter from the local church regarding HCF 23. Are there any questions from board members regarding, Mrs. Hampton was gracious enough to share this?
I have not yet shared that with the other board members.
Oh, you haven't shared it? Okay, no problem.
My time got away from me yesterday.
Okay, but you will share that with the board members and also the response to that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from board members or anything?
Okay.
Thank you.
So later today, District,
I
Stacy?
think Dr. May, does Dr. May have a question?
I don't have a question. I was just going to make the comment that there is not a direct health-related effect, but with the 23 causing the increased greenhouse. But the thing is, if you have increased greenhouse, then you have increased ozone, and then with having increased ozone, that does lead to health effects in terms of possibly having more asthma attacks and because of the poor quality. So I just wanted to clarify that when you said toxic versus the greenhouse, there is an indirect effect.
Thank you, Dr. May.
Thank you.
That's a very good point. It is one that we also made to US EPA, in particular around that ozone component. There's a penalty with respect to climate change, and as a community that struggles with ozone, it's going to become ever increasingly more difficult for us to meet our goal with the National Ambient Air Quality Standards as climate change increases. So later today, district staff, our peers from the Kentucky Division for Air Quality, and our colleagues at US EPA Region 4 will be meeting virtually for our annual visit. This is a unique feature under the Clean Air Act. Congress actually compels US EPA to meet with us face-to-face once a year. And in the past, this used to be a in-person meeting. For the second year, it will be virtual. But this is the way that the air quality improves. The Clean Air Act is implemented through something called cooperative federalism. The federal government sets the standards, and then they leave it to state and local programs like ours to develop the plans and the policies that will bring the area into attainment with those standards. So, as usual, we're going to cover things like our budget. US EPA, of course, and the federal government are currently in the midst of their budget negotiations. We are currently, as a air program across the nation, funded at 2004 levels. For those of you who've been paying attention, our work has become ever more complex with addition of new air monitoring techniques and new requirements, including photochemical assessment monitoring, as well as the complexity of source and the challenges that we face as those standards become ever more increasing. We are hopeful that EPA will receive additional funding and that we also will see additional funding both for our Clean Air Act Section 105 grant, which funds our day-to-day operations, as well as our Section 103 air monitoring grant. We'll also cover programmatic updates, permitting, air monitoring, compliance initiatives. We will talk about where we are as a state with those national ambient air quality standards for sulfur dioxide. You may remember that Jefferson County is in attainment for sulfur dioxide, but the implementation of the 2010 National Ambient Air Quality Standard continues. This has been undertaken in a phased approach by US EPA, and they're currently on round 4 of designations for that 2010 standard. There are places here in Kentucky now who have recently been designated as non-attainment for that 2010 SO2 standard. We'll also talk about ozone and particulate matter and other things, and then we will see them again next year in the annual meeting then.
Do they respond to you in the meeting?
Oh, it's very collaborative.
Okay.
So, and to let you know, we meet monthly with our state implementation plan partners at US EPA. We have a monthly meeting where we go over the outstanding SIP submittals that we have, what upcoming work we may need to do, and we typically try to get a heads up on what might be coming down the pike, because again, new things help us clean our air, but they also add challenges for our program. So we also meet quarterly with all of the programs who do this work here in Region 4. So within the 8 states of Region 4, on a quarterly basis, we get together with our colleagues at US EPA and the state and local programs, and we talk about things that are happening regionally and what things we may be encountering that we can borrow best practices from each other on. This work is incredibly collaborative. I will say sometimes that EPA's timeliness in responding is challenging, and I'll leave it at that. So.
Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
The funding at 2004 levels, is that like real 2004 dollars, or is that adjusted for inflation?
It's adjusted for inflation.
Okay.
But it's the same level
Right.
that we would have received in 2004. So we are very hopeful that we will see some additional funding. So moving on, the district has posted a copy of the 2021 Kentucky Ambient Air Quality Network Plan to our website. It's large. It also includes not just APCD's air monitoring network, but also the state's network and the monitors that are operated by the National Park Service in Mammoth Cave. This is a great document, and I encourage everyone to take a look at it. You'll find information here about each of our air monitoring sites, what we're monitoring for, the regulatory requirements that we're subject to at that site, and the type of equipment that we're operating. It'll also tell you siting information. And so for me, this is just a very helpful document. It'll tell you a little bit about our regulatory goals for those operations as well. I'm going to jump ahead just a bit, but I'm going to follow back up with air monitoring here in a second. As you're aware, just like Louisville, the nation is working to spend the American Recovery Plan funding that Congress has allocated. US EPA was allocated $100 million as part of that American Recovery Plan funding, $50 million of which they're going to use for environmental justice initiatives. And they have begun under that work to issue grants. In fact, our health department, we recently learned, was able to be granted some funding, $200,000 is our understanding, for an environmental justice project focusing on COVID-19. We look forward to hearing those details, and we'll share those with the board as we get them. But later this year, out of that second $50 million amount, EPA is going to launch a $20 million competitive grant competition. And that will be for community groups, state, tribal, and local air pollution control agencies, either individually or in partnership, to conduct monitoring of pollutants of greatest concerns in an area. And what we want to focus on there are those communities that have health outcomes that are different. So we are looking forward to finding out more details about those competitive grants. We have several projects that we're interested in pursuing, and we'll do so as soon as those grants become open, and hopefully we'll qualify for those. But EPA is also taking $22.5 million of that other $50 million funding in direct awards to air agencies for continuous monitoring of particulate matter and other common air pollutants. So what they're doing here, these grants are designed to support monitoring in and near communities with environmental justice concerns who face disproportionate exposure to particulate matter and other pollutants, and those health risks that are associated with that exposure. Their plan is to use this fund to replace existing filter-based monitors or otherwise enhance existing monitors in and near those communities to provide 24/7 real-time reporting of air quality concentrations. They will help to automate those particulate monitors that provide fine particulate data so that we have a consistent network across the community and across the nation. Now, the good news for us is that we're already upgraded. That means that we will likely not see funding for particulate matter monitors here in Louisville, but it may allow us to make some changes to our network. And my colleagues, Brian Harris and Tom Laub, have a presentation to help share information about our monitoring network for particulate matter. And if you all will help us understand where we're at, I think the board may have some follow-up questions. and I'll leave it to them.
Go. Let me stand behind. So
Either or.
I don't know if the
There's a mic right here as well, so right in front of the camera would be fine.
All right, I'll try right here. Good morning, Chairman Hilton. Good morning, board members. My name is Brian Parris. I'm the supervisor of the Quality Assurance and Air Toxics Group within the Air Monitoring Program. As Hamilton said, we'll be talking about some of our PM 2.5 monitoring methods. It turns out today is an appropriate day to talk about PM 2.5. You may have noticed the hazy sunshine yesterday and today, so we've got some smoke coming into the area from some of the western fires. Go ahead and next slide, please. So I'll be talking about three different PM 2.5 monitoring methods. Give a quick overview of some of those methods. The first of those methods is the oldest method, and that's the federal reference method. This method involves drawing ambient air into a specially designed inlet, a particle separator that uses the principles of inertia to separate the smaller particles, 2.5 microns and smaller, onto a filter. That sample runs for 24 hours. So PM 2.5 is deposited onto that filter for a 24-hour period. And then after that, we have our monitoring staff will go out, collect the sample. There's a picture of the filter in the bottom right there. So they'll go out and collect that filter and bring it back to the office, and we'll ultimately ship it off to a laboratory. The turnaround time for getting the actual results from that filter is about a month. So again, this is one of the oldest methods. It's more manual method. We run these samples about once every 3 days. So it does not give a complete picture of air quality of every hour, every day. It gives kind of a sampling every 3 days. This method is a little more expensive and laborious because you have to send it to the laboratory. There's a lot of QA requirements involved with this. And again, the turnaround time is typically about a month to get the data back. The next method, and I should mention that all three of these methods that we're talking about today are approved methods by EPA. There are some subtle differences in the methods, and we'll get into that a little bit later. The next method is it's a federal equivalent method, so it was determined to be equivalent to the previous method that I talked about. This is the Met 1 DAM 1020. This instrument is similar to the FRM in that it uses a specially designed inlet and a particle separator to separate those smaller particles. They are deposited onto a type of filter. This is a glass fiber filter tape in this case. But the difference with this method is that this filter tape will advance every hour, and so you get a new measurement every hour. So this is more of an automated method. We introduced the Met 1 DAM 1020s into the network in 2010, and initially, we found these to be fairly easy to operate, less labor intensive as opposed to going out to the site every week to collect samples. You can let this run for a couple weeks up to a month, and it will continually collect data. Again, it gives you hourly values. We did end up finding out after using this method a little bit more that we saw some variability in the data. We did see there's lengthy background tests that are required to properly calibrate these instruments, and we also had some issues with some of the filter tape. I should also mention that the way that this is not a direct measure of PM through a mass measuring of a weighing of the filter. It's the principle is beta rays are sent through the filter. There's a detector on the other side, and it measures the attenuation or the loss or the absorption of those beta rays on that filter tape, which the particulate is on, and uses that to determine, quantify the particulate concentration. Next slide, please. And then our third method is the newest method that we've utilized lately is the API Teledyne T640. This method is a pretty different method from what we've used in the past. It uses light scattering spectrometry to quantify your PM2.5 concentration. We introduced this instrument to the network in 2018. It does provide continuous data like the BAM, hourly measurements, but it also provides sub-hourly measurements too, so you get even a more fine scale temporal analysis of the data. It does not require any background testing like the BAM did. It's less labor intensive. We found this instrument to work really well, and it's much easier to operate than the BAM 1020. It does contain some, as with any instrument, it does contain its own operational challenges, though. Next slide, please. So how do we assess these different methods? Compared to some of our gaseous analyzers, it's a bit different. With our gaseous analyzers, we have a known test gas standard that we can subject through the inlet into the gaseous analyzer. We know that concentration, and we can compare that known concentration to what the analyzer reads to determine the accuracy. With particulate matter, there's no real practical method to introduce a known concentration of particulate to an instrument. You would need something like a laboratory grade smoke chamber or something like that to really assess the accuracy of the instrument. It's not practical. So what we do to kind of assess these methods is we use co-location. And what co-location is you have, you set one instrument at the same site alongside another instrument. You want to make sure that they're separated by 1 to 4 meters. You let those instruments run over, a 24-hour period. Some of these are running continuously, and we collect the data, and then we compare that data to determine how repeatable or get an understanding of the precision of those instruments, see how those two instruments compare with the data. You can see, so in the graph that I'm showing here, this is kind of a theoretical co-location analysis, and ideally, when you set these two instruments up, you'll get the same value from one instrument and another. Of course, there's inherent error in every instrument method, and we don't always get the one-to-one comparison. But this regression line that we've plotted here is kind of how we assess the co-location. Again, ideally, you're going to get all these data points that are plotted right on top of this regression line. So take into consideration this kind of hypothetical example, and I'll show in this next slide some real results. So these are some of the co-location results from the 3 different methods. On the top right, that is some co-location results from our PM2.5 MET1 BAM method. On the bottom right, those are results from our federal reference method, so that's that filter-based manual method. And then on the bottom left is our Teledyne T640 method. And again, what we want to see is a lot of those data points congregated, concentrated right on that line. And the thing that may jump out here is that the BAM method on that top right, you see a little more separation in the data. So you get a little bit more variability from instrument to instrument on the PM2.5. It's still a pretty good correlation. The regression line is still a good fit with an R-squared of 0.92. But you can see that the FRM method on the bottom right and the Teledyne T640 method on the bottom left have a more concentrated data points right on that line with R-squared values at 0.98, 0.99, really close to that ideal 1.0. So we ultimately, determined through some co-location studies over the course of the last decade, really, that the FRM and the Teledyne T640 are really our preferred methods at this point for monitoring PM2.5. So we did transition away from the Net1 BAM, and we have implemented, Tom Robb and his group have implemented these T640s throughout the network in the last 2 to 3 years. Next slide. So a quick summary again on the co-location results. The T640 co-location results show excellent repeatability. The T640 repeatability is in line with the FRM results. So those are pretty comparable methods in terms of repeatability and precision. So really the T640 combines some of the reliability of the FRM method with the continuous nature of the BAM method. So we really like the T640. With all this being said, there are still some differences that we see in the data between, say, the T640 and the FRM, and I'll show a few slides summarizing some of those differences. So just like we can co-locate like instruments at the same site, we can also co-locate different PM 2.5 methods at the same site. And so that's what we've done over the last couple of years. We've had the federal reference method instruments at 2 of our sites, and we also have the T640 instruments at those same 2 sites, so we can compare the PM 2.5 data from those 2 different instruments. So top left is a time series analysis of the comparison of those 2 different methods, and you can see kind of a seasonal oscillation. Again, that's a 2-year period that we're looking at in the top left. You can see that during the winter time, you tend to see a greater difference between the T640 and the FRM method on the order of maybe 2 micrograms. And then in the summertime, it dips back down and you're close to that 0 microgram difference. So they're very similar measurements during the summertime. Again, next winter, it goes back up, you get a little more difference. So you see that seasonal oscillation. This is depicted in the bottom right graph too. Those are just looking at the average monthly difference between your T640 method and your federal reference method. Again, on the order of 1 to 2 microgram difference between those methods for the T6 during the winter months, and then pretty similar concentrations during the summer months. And this is the T640 tends to has a greater concentration. It provides a greater PM 2.5 concentration than the FRM.
Give us a sense which one's more accurate?
Good question. We'll get into that in just a little bit. Next slide, please. So, for the board reports, we provide the air quality data summaries, and historically we've provided PM 2.5 summaries from these federal reference method instruments. As of 2019, we started to provide PM 2.5 data summaries from the T640 instruments. And we mainly just wanted to make everyone aware that, again, there are some subtle differences between these methods. And so if someone's looking at a time series analysis, you may see some of these subtle differences. And so what we've got here, we've got 2 charts. One on the left is just FRM data, and they're just annual average PM 2.5 concentrations from 2014 to 2020. And what those data show is about a 2 microgram per meter cube reduction over a 7-year period. Now, if you combine the T640 PM 2.5 data with the FRM, you get a slightly different picture. We still show, we're still seeing a reduction in PM 2.5 over that 7-year period, but because that T640 reports a little bit higher concentration than the FRM, that reduction over the 7-year period ends up being 1 microgram per meter cube over that same time period. So again, if you're looking at a time series, it's just something to be aware of when interpreting trends. Next slide.
Excuse me.
So some summaries and takeaways. Again, we've evaluated several different particulate monitoring methods over the years, and we've generally transitioned from federal reference methods to continuous methods, though we still do use those federal reference methods at 2 sites currently. The FRMs and T640s have shown excellent repeatability and precision. The T640s do provide several advantages over the federal reference method in that there's more data available. You can understand the diurnal profile during a day. And then you can also see some, when you have a short-term spike in PM 2.5, you can see that obviously much better than what you would in a federal reference method.
I think Dr. Coburn may have had a comment.
Sure.
Yes, thanks. I did have a question on the last graph. There was, I think a blue, there you go, the blue line and the gray line. I can't read the legend there. I don't know if anybody else can. So I don't know what's the difference between those two lines. What's blue? What does the blue represent, and what does the gray represent?
Yeah, sorry that that's not very easily seen. Those are just
That's because it's so small. Yeah.
Those are just two different sites. So those one's from our Durrett Lane near road site, and one's from our Cannons Lane site near the Bowman Field Airport.
Yeah.
The Durrett Lane near road site is our highest PM 2.5 site in our network. So you typically will see a higher concentration at that Durrett Lane site over the Cannons Lane site.
Oh, okay. And while I have the floor here, I have a question concerning the light scattering method. It's well known that these atmospheric particles contain substances which are either hygroscopic or hydrophilic, meaning that they grow as the relative humidity increases because they absorb water, increasing their mass. So normally, using light scattering techniques, you have a way of drying the sample before it comes in. I assume you do that, but I'm just asking, do you do that? Is there a dryer method?
Yes, there is a heater, a dryer, and
heater.
The maximum, essentially it dries the sample to no more than 35% relative humidity.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so T640s do provide some advantages. Again, there are some differences in the T640 and the FRM. So to your question, which method is most accurate?
Good question.
It's a good question. It's a difficult question to answer. We really don't know. There's a lot of debate in the air monitoring community on which one is accurate because there's not that smoke chamber that you can really
working on standards. I mean, quality control standards.
So the best way that we can verify that these instruments are working well is to verify that the flow is accurate. So if we're collecting sample with a constant flow, then we know that the sample volume is, and we can, that's when we do our routine QC checks, when Tom and his group goes out and do his routine QC checks, we're verifying the accuracy of the flow. There's still, that I'm aware, not a standard that, can be subjected with a known concentration of particulate.
Will I add that, Brian? Should I
Yes.
stand on camera?
Introduce yourself, please.
Tom Law, the Air Monitoring Project Supervisor. So one of the advantages of the Teledyne T640 method, as we've talked about, there is no standard to test with PM without laboratory grade smoke chamber. So they have developed, they give us a monodispersive polyester span dust, they call it. This is a proprietary product made by Teledyne API, which we go out on a 90-day frequency, and we're able to introduce the dust into the sample stream, and we do have some pass-fail criteria so that we can evaluate the performance of the instrument, the health of the LED detection system, and the light scatter. Essentially, the Teledyne T640 is a nephelometer. It would be another term for the light scatter method. So this instrument gives us a feedback. It's not, it doesn't give us a micron of the dust that it reads because this is proprietary technology. So they abstract this out into something called, written a book on this pretty much, but it escapes me at the moment. Peak channel and peak channel counts, which is all very technical. I think I included that in one of our presentations last year about this method. So that is something that is an advantage to the T640 method, is that it does give us some sort of standard to implement in a physical sense out in the field so that we can verify the accuracy and be confident in our results measurement. As we talked about the FRM method, and Dr. Kovner made a very good point about hygroscopic loss in particles and how hygroscopic addition to mass and how this instrument drives it off. There is a disadvantage to the FRM filter-based method too, in that some particulate that has some volatiles attached to it can be lost during the recovery period. So with that 24-hour sample for the FRM, if there's some particulate that has some volatiles attached to it, collected, say, in hour 1, some of those may have dissipated already by the end of the sample period, over 24 hours.
Thank you.
And I will add, EPA, they come out every year and they bring their own samplers. They're basically essentially the equivalent to the federal reference method sampler. They'll set it up at our site, run samples, and compare it against any instruments that we have. So that's another way that they kind of audit us to determine, accuracy of the PM2.5 data that we collect. But yeah, final takeaway is, again, changes in the monitoring methods can have subtle impacts on, somebody doing a detailed analysis, a trend analysis or something like that. It can have some subtle impacts on that. So something to be aware of. And I believe that's it. And if there's any other questions, Tom or myself?
So you be going to the T640 methodology exclusively?
So we are required by EPA regulations to maintain at least one federal reference method sampler, possibly two, I can't remember. But for the time being, we're required to maintain at least one or two of those federal reference methods. But we do have T640. Tom and his group has set them up at all of our sites. We've got T640s operating at all of our sites.
Yeah, so to speak to Director Hamilton's comment about where the nationwide networks are going and trying to implement more continuous PM, we were very early adopters. Our program manager, Billy DeWitt, is always looking to push the science. We do not like to rest when we've done this for 20 years. So, we want to see what are we going to be doing 5 years from now? What's everybody else going to be doing? So to my knowledge, we may have been the first, weren't many people that beat us to completely replace our continuous network with the Teledyne T640. And trade groups within the industry, everybody's going towards these instruments. They really like them. Being early adopters, we experienced a few headaches, but we've also solved some problems for a lot of our colleagues. We just recently gave a presentation to the Region 4 Air Monitoring Workshop and solved a lot of questions that they had. And most of our colleagues are contacting us fairly regularly for advice on these instruments. And we've given a lot of input for national standard operating procedures and troubleshooting procedures for these instruments. We've even gotten some good feedback from the manufacturer themselves that, we furthered their, I shouldn't say understanding of their own instrument, but we furthered their process for improvement as it gets firmware updates and things like that.
Great. And before we move to this, officially this method, Tom and his group did a lot of work to do some special co-location studies to really wanted to understand what we're dealing with before we implement it throughout the network. So they did some good work on making sure that we're kind of understanding what we're dealing with before we install transition to this method.
Yes, we did that before complete network replacement of the BAM 1020s. That way we were confident in this new method before complete implementation.
So from a regulatory perspective, and don't go too far, follow up for you, but from a regulatory perspective, because we are required currently to run that FRM method, as the nation itself comes up to where our continuous monitoring program is, it's our hope that USDBA will revise that rule and make continuous monitor the federal reference method, eliminating our filter-based equipment, which I know some of our staff really like that equipment. That's a benefit to us. It is labor intensive. It is an investment for us to continue to run that equipment. So our preference would be that we get everybody up to our level and that we change that rule so that we are using one type of instrumentation.
I would think the time delay in analysis results is, gotta have some impact.
I hope.
Yes, that's huge. Getting minute resolution data that we have now is just so valuable. It's so interesting to look at that data. So yeah, if we're populating a graph, instead of a 24-hour point here, here, and here, we constantly have a 1-minute point. Yeah, everywhere.
So could you all please let the board know about our current air quality conditions that we're seeing with particulate matter?
Sure. Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, you probably noticed the hazy sunshine the last couple of days, and we've been monitoring it closely. And yesterday, I think it's Wednesday. I think it may have been Monday. We first noticed a bit of an increase in PM 2.5, and the particulate is we're pretty confident is from smoke from some of the western wildfires, and I mean it's really encompassed a huge area of the United States. I mean the Midwest, the Northeast. You've probably seen maybe some headlines on the news lately about some of the air quality impacts, and so I think some of the models are indicating that this will persist for at least another day, and maybe even longer than that. So.
Is it not early for the fire season to be severe?
I should know. I used to live in Arizona, so but I think it's a little early. I know that I heard just on I think NPR this morning, that the heat wave that they had out west have really just helped dry out all that fuel in the forest more so than maybe a typical year. So I think it might be a little early.
Will it have impacts on other parameters besides in 2.5?
Forest fires will also generate vast amounts of nitrogen oxide. Those two can be transported, and they may impact things like ozone formation. So with this current event, we're not seeing that aspect of it.
Doesn't look like it. But.
Ozone is a tricky thing. I wish this were wood.
You've been keeping an eye on ozone, and so far, hasn't gotten too high.
Good.
Yeah. We'll keep an eye on it this week and see what happens. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for an excellent presentation. I have one quick question. You mentioned in one method you use a 24-hour composite sample, and you do it every 3 days. Do you change up the day of the week, like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday? How do you choose the days?
So EPA has a set sampling schedule.
Oh, okay.
And so they set out 3 days because that ends up, over the course of months, ends up rotating Monday, Tuesdays, Wednesdays. So every day ends up.
So you get a sample every day of the year.
Yeah. So we don't want to bias it towards weekdays or weekends or anything like that. Thank you. All right. Thank you all.
Any other questions from board members?
Are you done?
Chairman Hilton, I do have two follow-ups, if I may interrupt.
Yeah.
I wanted to let you know that Quan Wen, who is our newest Jefferson County attorney, has joined us here in the Edison room today. I've introduced him before, but for those of you in attendance, Quan, you want to step up and everyone can
give us a little.
We are very glad to have this assistant, our former county attorney, Susan Ely, fully retired.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Chairman
Thank you
Hilton.
all. It's glad to be here. Good.
And then, Chairman Hilton, because Ms. Allen has joined us, if you would give us leave to share our appreciation. Heather, we did this earlier, and we're going to do this again because it's well worth it. We want to thank you so much for your service to the board and to the community and to the district. I explained to everyone that you found your dream home and that you will be leaving us for the green pastures of Nelson County, and we will desperately and deeply miss you. So your last year has been a virtual service, but your service has been incredibly real, and thank you so much for your interest. So again, our thanks to you, and we wish you and your family great health and joy in your new home.
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Heather, on behalf of the board, I would like to offer my sincere appreciation, gratitude, and thanks for serving on the APCD board. It's harder and harder these days to get the number of volunteers to serve on the Louisville Metro board. But you have made time in your busy schedule to serve on this board. So thank you again and wishing you the best.
Thank you, Carl.
You want to say anything?
I do. I just wanted to say thank you to all y'all for being so kind. Rachel, especially, she and I have had some phone conversations that were lengthy about as to why I joined the board, and she understood my reasoning for that. And I just really appreciate the education that I've learned too, because this is totally out of my field. This is not something that I specialize in, but I've learned a lot, and I've been able to pass on information to my clients that I didn't know that is important to them for business and different reasons. But I really appreciate you all allowing me to be a member of the board, and I just hope you all continue to grow.
Thank you very much. We'll miss
Thank
you.
you. And I'm sorry I was late, but I was stuck in a wreck on Gene Snyder. And you all know how the Gene Snyder is.
Okay, thank you, Heather.
All right, thanks.
I'm through. Thank you, sir.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
I saw the other day where the city was having a meeting, or maybe the council, in regards to the budget from the rescue plan.
Mm-hmm.
You guys are at the table.
So
That, or not?
everyone's at the table. The way that the city has done this, they had an early call for projects. So APCD has offered 2 projects that we would like to have funded. We've offered them as part of Louisville Metro's American Recovery Plan funding. We were asked to submit those same projects to US EPA early in their efforts to try to figure out how to use the funding that they were going to receive. So where the funding process currently is, as I understand it, is that Louisville Metro government has this ready cache of projects that they believe through the Build Back Better Together process, which they had started during the pandemic, have given them an indication of where that money would be most useful. Metro Council is now holding listening sessions to hear from the public. The last one will be Monday night from 6 to 8, and I believe it's at the West Broadway Church. But there are also opportunities for people to provide their comments on how that funding should be spent online. I don't know if we can put that in the chat, Michelle. If you... All right, don't worry about that. We're not in the spot to do that today. That's something this meeting will have to figure out how we do that. But Metro Council, ultimately is going to help greenlight which projects will be funded, and there's just a tremendous opportunity with $380 million.
When will those decisions be made?
It's my understanding that those decisions will be made soon. There is a time frame for spending the first part of the allocation. So this process can't go on much longer because it actually will cut into the ability to get the projects completed within the required time frame.
Thank you.
Is that it?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Moving along, we had the point of the air quality data. Sure most of you received the reports electronically. Are there any questions regarding the air quality data report?
I think mine were answered in the presentation.
Okay. Any questions regarding the enforcement status summary report?
I have a question, or just a comment on the air quality data.
Okay.
Just a minor comment. Mostly things look pretty good. Of course, we have to keep following along with ozone. But on the PM, see on page 3, I think there's a graph. I think there's a error on the scale there, which is 0 to 160 micrograms per meter cubed, with a peak being near 160. I think that's probably was intended to be 0 to 16.
Okay,
You say page 3?
page 3.
Page 3, yeah, there's a graph there. It's a time series, PM 2.5 from July 3rd to the 8th from 5 different monitors.
Okay.
So, yeah, those, I believe those are actually accurate because those are trying to illustrate the high hourly concentrations that we saw over the July 4th period from the firework activity.
Dr. Coburn, were you able to hear that explanation?
Did you hear that, Dr. Coburn?
Yeah. Okay, so, well, okay, I guess so. I guess that spike is just an extremely high spike. So the points are, what do the points represent? I mean, what's the time resolution? Is that an hourly average or what?
Yeah, those would be hourly average data in that graph there. So
Hourly averages, I see. Okay.
Yeah, the 24-hour average, it remained below the 24-hour standard, but we certainly saw some large peaks in the hourly concentration. That would be
Yeah,
on
I see. I see. Yeah, so it sort of levels off to 20. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Okay. Well, that's it on that one. I had a comment on the air toxics one too, but I'll wait till you get to that. Okay, thanks.
Well, we can go right to our toxic. Dr. Coburn, got a question on that one or comment?
Yeah, these are just some minor things too, but on page 1, I think there's a typo at the top. It says June 2021 board meeting. I think it's for the July meeting. And then it says summary for February 2021, which doesn't make sense. And I noticed in the June report, it also says February 2021. Is that a leftover from, previous reports or what?
Yeah, so this report provides a little bit of an update from the February data that we provided before, in that the prior report did not contain information for 1,3-butadiene and vinyl chloride because we had not completed the validation process for those compounds. And so this report simply provides an updated information for 1,3-butadiene and vinyl chloride for the month of February. We've been doing a lot of work with trying to get our second auto GC site up at our Cannon Lane TAM site, and so there's always a lag in kind of evaluating and validating these VOC data, and so we were not able to have March data available yet.
Okay.
I see. Oh, okay. I didn't know the lag was that much, but if that's, yeah, I can understand that there's a lot to that analysis and so on. A question on that for whomever is appropriate person to answer this, perhaps Ms. Hamilton, but I noticed on those long-term averages, which aren't annual averages yet, but it's what you have. And on some of the compounds, not all of them, the concentrations are greater than the benchmark values, the star cancer BAC, which are based on annual average, of course. Should it turn out that when you have a year's worth of data that these, for these compounds, for example, for butadiene, they exceed the benchmark quantity, which is associated with a 1 in a million risk, would there be any regulatory consequences for that? or actions resulting.
So you are correct. The benchmark ambient concentration is representative of a risk of 1 in a million.
Mm-hmm.
The environmental acceptability goals for a facility are 7.5 in a million for existing facilities for all toxic air contaminants from all processes. And then when we look at that ambient air quality data, we're assessing it to look at it from a multiple ambient air standpoint. There are multiple emitters of 1,3-butadiene. There are several facilities in Rubbertown that emit that chemical. It's also a product of combustion that's also found just from the tailpipe of vehicles. Yes, we are in the process of each month reviewing this information to see if we spot trends that are associated with a facility. The STAR program does give us a broad regulatory authority, but we're also looking at it for those other ambient concentrations. One thing that we'll be able to see as we bring the PAMS equipment online at Cannons Lane is what the 1,3-butadiene concentration from an area that has no sources other than mobile sources looks like. That will help us better understand that mobile source concentration. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, pretty much. So you're basically you're still evaluating things.
Evaluated on a monthly basis. We're looking for those things that might have caused a higher than expected emission during that time frame, such as an excess emission event.
Yeah.
We're looking at it on a quarterly trend basis. Is there something creeping up that's unexpected to it? For example, with respect to 1,3-butadiene, the long-term average there is 12 micrograms per cubic meter compared to a benchmark ambient concentration of 0.02. That's a risk in ambient air of about 6 in a million. So for us, with respect to the Strategic Toxic Air Reduction Program, multiple sources, the other goals in the program, we're continuing to evaluate that.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
I have a question on that report. What is the STAR Chronic Non-Cancer PHC?
So under the STAR program, we look both at cancer and also at non-cancer impacts. And the chronic part of it, Carl, is kind of that long-term exposure that causes you to have coughs and headaches. It's compared to an acute, non-cancer exposure where there might be, for example, a large-scale release that causes an immediate impact.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? Where am I? We down to the enforcement status report. Any questions regarding that report? Enforcement status summary. Okay, access emission summary report. I noticed on the next report, the complaint and investigation status summary, we had a total over 50 complaints. Is that true for the month of June? Kind of high, isn't it? 50? Quite a few.
One thing that happens when the weather gets warm is that things that might not have smelled so bad last month smell a lot better, or smell a lot worse this month.
Yeah, I see a lot of these were referred to MSD. Also.
Yeah.
Okay.
People are on site more too. Right?
Yeah.
So.
They are.
Lawn care for clean air quality report. Any questions on that? When does that start? I mean, when does it end, I guess?
It's a year-round program.
It's a year-round?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions on these reports? See, like we really got these reports today.
We'll do a shameless plug on that lawn care for cleaner air. If you are interested in acquiring an electric-powered lawn equipment,
Mm-hmm.
we encourage you all to do that. Please use that rebate opportunity to your advantage.
Are you seeing it mainly household versus commercial?
It's largely residential, yes.
Residential.
But we have had some commercial entities take advantage of the program. And
That's the reference to the one company that's dealing with.
yeah, we're hopeful that they kind of lead the way and show that the use of electric equipment in a commercial application is quite viable.
Oh, thank you. Are there any questions from board members on any of these reports? If not, before I adjourn the meeting, I'd like to again thank everyone for your participation, and looking forward, hopefully, we can see everyone in person soon. So I will now adjourn this regular meeting of the board, and thank you for your participation. The next board meeting is Wednesday, August 18th at 10 a.m. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye.